All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. And on this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast, I have the privilege of being joined by Mark Jenkins, whose slogan right now is Suns Out, Guns Out. Mark, what's going on, man? Happy to see you, man.
What's going on, Will? How's it going, bro?
Listen, I can't complain, man. And as always, let's get right to it because this is a topic that you and I, we've talked about. It's been festering for quite some time. And basically, it's the new mindset and the current mindset of starting pitchers around Major League Baseball. And clearly, it's a different era in baseball for a variety of reasons. And I'm one of those who's willing to put some of this blame on the analytics. I mean, you look no further right now in MLB as far as the starting pitchers go, and their mindset has changed. And in my opinion, it goes back to the oversaturation of the analytics. First things first, if a starting pitcher gets two complete games now per season, okay, it basically warrants a parade when once upon a time that was the norm for a week. Starting pitchers and managers, they're and organizations as a whole, they're just married to the pitch count as going over 100 pitches is frowned upon. And from, where once starting pitchers had the mindset to go out there and, throw the entire game, now it's basically getting through 5 or 6 innings is now looked at as a quality start. And I mean, we see so many starting pitchers nowadays where, if they're dealing, so to say, and they give their team 7 quality innings, we see the bullpens blow it. Because, it's all about, well, these guys may be overwhelmed, this, that, and the third, but at the end of the day, you got to use your common sense and say, hey, if a guy is out there dealing, you know what? Let him go out there and deal because I am of the mindset that if you've got a guy out there dealing and you take him out of the game and you bring in a fresh arm, you're kind of letting that opposing lineup off the hook. So it's just a mindset. I mean, nowadays these kids they get to 100 pitches or not even 100, they're at 80 and already they're looking over their shoulder to see, you know what? Are they going to get somebody warmed up in the bullpen because my night is done? It's a different era in baseball, totally. And I mean, we're gonna, unwrap a lot of it, on this edition. But I just want to get your thoughts from the initial stuff that I said.
Yeah, man. I mean, first and foremost, like when you came to me with this idea, it's all about the mindset. And I'm glad that you even like positioned it that way because, as anything in life, mindset is the start, the jump off point for anything. Like you can't make anything happen without the mindset of telling you can make it happen. So if these guys are now having the mindset that they're only capable, and I say capable with quotes, they're only capable of going so far or doing so much, they're already having that idea that this is all my night's going to be. So it's no different than going to a job and hey, I've got this hour to this hour, and after that, I'm clocking out. Whereas before, the mindset of the pitcher was, I'm there until the job's done. It's not necessarily on the clock sort of thing. It's if I got to put in overtime or whatever the case may be, I'm the man for the job, the best man for the job at the beginning of that day. And I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that I complete the job. So the mindset, I think, from the beginning is totally different than what it was before in the days of a Bob Gibson. Could you imagine a Bob Gibson, a Juan Marichal? I mean, you name anybody. I'm talking 80s and previous.
Hmm.
Any
Even in
good
the
pitcher.
'90s, even in the
Yeah,
'90s,
I'll give you the early
and
90s.
and
Yeah.
and and, uh, and honestly, you can make a case for the 2000s as well because we still had Randy Johnson, we still had Pedro Martinez,
He had a
you
couple
still
unicorns.
you still had Glavine, you still had Maddox, and even honestly, before I flip it back over to you, I think it stopped with the guys who are at the tail end of their careers right now, and I'm talking about Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, and Clayton Kershaw. I gotta say, of the current like studs, if you will, the only guy that really has that mindset, in my opinion, is Garrett Cole. And of course,
Yeah.
after he just underwent Tommy John, you and I know that the Yankees are going to approach him with kid gloves for next year.
Oh, absolutely. Now,
Mhm.
see, the reason that I take it back a little bit further than that, because one of my points in this whole is I think it coincides with the great race of 98. I think that's what began to change a lot of the pitcher's mentality
Mhm.
because chicks dig the long ball.
Right.
It was all about the long ball. And with the increase of the home runs in the steroid era from that late 90s, early 2000, I think that's where another point that I'm going to bring up later kind of dampen that. So to me, I think it's that kind of late 90s cutoff is when a man's man stopped being a pitcher, so to speak, if that makes sense with the mindset.
Yeah, listen, I mean, to this day, I always laugh about this story, and I always remember not too long after Orlando Hernandez, and of course, to everybody else, he's known as El Duque. Not that long after, he came to the Yankees, and, Joe Torre came out to the mound to take him out of the game. I can't remember if it was the sixth or seventh inning. And El Duque, he's looking around, he's got his interpreter there. He's astonished because he's told him straight up and down. He was like, listen, in Cuba, you started the game and you finished it. There was no bullpen.
Yep.
you know,
Start what you finish.
right. And to your point, you mentioned Orlando Cepeda. There was a game during the 1950s. The San Francisco Giants played the then Milwaukee Braves. The game went 16 innings. Orlando Cepeda and Warren Spahn pitched the entire game for both clubs.
Right. I mean, and that right there shows you that these dudes were just built different and the mindset's different. So, I'm gonna like bring up my first point as to why I think this decrease is happening. And I think it's like I was kind of alluding to before with the evolution of the steroid era and home runs just being completely prevalent in the
Hmm.
game. I think pitchers changed their mentality to where, okay,
Oh yeah.
95 is not getting past this guy anymore. I've got
Hmm.
to dial it up a bit. I've got to figure out a way to touch 98, 99 triple digits. And
Right.
I think that's the first component as to why these pitchers are no longer able to go deeper into the games because they're
Hmm.
burning themselves out too early. So I went and I did a little digging on this one. Average velocity of a fastball in the 1920s was
Hmm.
between 80 to 85 miles an hour.
Okay.
And evolution is natural.
Correct.
We get bigger, we get stronger, we get faster. However, the average fastball in the 80s was only touching between 87 to 89. Average fastball.
Right.
Wasn't until we got into the early 2000s when
Hmm.
that average fastball started to creep up to 93.
Hmm.
And now the average fastball is 96.4 miles per hour in today's game.
That's a big jump. That's a
So
big
if
jump.
you look at, just that 100-year span from, let's call it 1925 to
That's close.
2025.
That's close to 15 miles an hour of an increase.
Exactly. And,
Hmm.
and, and when you're putting that kind of strain on
Yep.
that arm, on that
Yep.
shoulder, on that elbow, you're not going to be able to go out there and toss 100, 125, 130 pitches in a game.
No,
You're gonna start getting tired probably around that 75, 80, 85 pitch count.
and see these are some of the things that analytics don't account for because to your point, you said during the 80s it was like 87 to 89 as
Yeah,
far as the average.
87, 89.
Okay, you figure every era of baseball, we always had the elite of the elite power pitchers.
Mhm.
In the 70s, you could say it was Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan. In the 80s, you could say it was the likes of Nolan Ryan and Roger Clemens. In the 90s, you could say it was Roger Clemens, it was Pedro Martinez, it was Randy Johnson, it was Kurt Schilling, those guys. The point that I'm trying to make is, and this is, some people might get tired of me saying this as far as in analytics, Or analytics is basically just saying, or these teams are basically just saying, go out there and throw as hard as you can.
Hmm.
And for me, it's like the equivalent of if you have a guy, and I know some guys like this, okay, who can bench 500 pounds, and you're basically grading every single guy that comes into that gym off of that and saying, you know what, we want you to bench 500 pounds. It's not humanly possible.
Right.
Okay, listen, you have the elite of elite lifters who can bench, 600 pounds. Okay, me personally, I could tell you I topped out of four plates, four bills. It took everything out of me. All right. And I listen, I know guys who can't bench three. All right. And I know guys who struggle with two. So my point is, it's like you can't basically judge everybody by that scale because everybody is not meant to hit 98 on the radar gun. That's first and foremost for me. Secondly, you look at some of the great power pitchers over the years, and I think about a Pedro Martinez, for an example, a guy who was slight in stature, okay, but got the most out of that and then some. And of course, he did it in the steroid era. I mean, I remember Pedro was asked about this on the MLB network because if you remember, and I still think it's still one of my favorite All-Star games, the 99 All-Star game. It was at Fenway Park. Pedro had just came to the Red Sox. Um, he got the start. He threw the first two innings of the game. And I think five out of the six batters that he faced, he struck out. And that included McGuire, Sammy Sosa. I think Jeff Bagwell was in that mix. I think Barry Larkin, albeit Barry Larkin wasn't a power hitter. But still, I mean, you figure it was like a who's who of power hitters in that era that Pedro was facing, and he mowed him down. My point is this: as good and as dominant as Pedro was throughout his career, his fastball was natural. And then on
Hmm.
top of that, Pedro, Randy Johnson, and all the other greats, they knew how to dial it up when they had to. Pedro might hit 94, 95 for like the first three or four innings, maybe once in a while 96. But come seventh or eighth inning, if he knew he needed to get a guy out, like if the Red Sox or the Expos were up by two and it was the eighth inning and the opposing team had a guy on base and his manager entrusted him to go out there and get that final out, he knew how to dial it up to 89 or not 99, excuse me, but he knew how to set you up. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And it
His
was
off
like,
speed stuff.
right. And that's what the great ones learn how to do. And I think in today's era, we have more throwers of the baseball and not more pitchers. There's a big time difference. And it's to the point, I feel like the time, like, we see so many guys blow out their arms nowadays. And it's
Hmm.
not just even at the uh the MLB level. We see it at the collegiate level. I remember a couple of guys I went to college with blew out their arms. And you even see it at the high school level. And I feel like the Tommy John surgery, which was about 50 years ago when it happened. And a lot of people don't remember. It was an exploratory surgery
Hmm.
at the time. All right. You have a scenario where the Tommy John surgery for me, I feel like it's the MLB equivalent to the ACL injury in the NFL, or like now the rapidly increasing Achilles injury in the NBA. And it's almost like accepted. It's like basically if a pitcher doesn't have Tommy John at least once throughout his career, he's not doing something right. And I feel like, again, so many guys are overthrown. We've got guys throwing 98, 99, 100 miles an hour. They really don't need to be doing that. And then on top of that, the biggest thing for me, if you're throwing a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, your changeup shouldn't be 90 or 91 either.
Right.
You know
Because
what I'm
that's not
saying?
much of a changeup.
No, it's really not. You know what I'm saying? I think, before I flip it back over to you, I think about a guy, Johan Santana, who had to recreate himself and reinvent himself after his shoulder surgery. But nonetheless, Johan was topping out at like 94 in his fastball. But when he threw his change, and I think it was Eduardo Perez from ESPN, he referred to it as Bugs Bunny because his change
Mhm.
was 72. And of course, you know a little bit about baseball. You know more than a little bit about baseball. So, the changeup has, the same arm movement, and it's basically coming out of the hand almost like a fastball, but that's what it's meant to, like, keep that batter off. And I mean, if you set somebody up with 94, 95, 95, 95, you're peppering them, and then you hit them with a 72, 75 mile an hour changeup. Hey, that's what it's all about, man. You got to be cerebral out there. And I think it goes back to the mindset, man, because it's like pitching at its purest form is an art form. And, like, just like how you said, uh, chicks dig the long ball and stuff like that. Yo, listen, the strikeout can bring fans into the stadiums too, because I remember back when Dwight Gooden first came up with the Mets. And yo, he was must see TV, man, because everybody wanted to be there because, it was not uncommon for Doc Gooden in his prime to strike out 15 guys per game. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think people have just fallen in love with that as opposed to the pitching aspect.
Well, see, to the point there with that, I think it's not only just the pitcher being the pitcher, but I think the pitcher's also got to have some type of aura surrounding him.
Right,
You look at a guy, like you said, the doctor. You look at a guy, Kerry Wood, Roger Clemens, like they had an aura kind of around them. So that
right.
way, when they were out there, K'ing 15, 16, 17, the latter two that I named 20 guys in a game,
Hmm.
when they were doing that, it was an aura around it. So
Right.
for whatever reason, I think that there are only a few pitchers in today's game that have that type of aura around them. A
Right.
Paul Skeens, a Tarik Skubal, a Garrett Cole. Um, I mean, there's not many, man, that have
No.
that aura surrounding them that when they walk to the bump,
Hmm.
to do their warm-ups
Right.
before the beginning of the first inning, you kind of see. Remember, I'm going to go back to Dave Chappelle show when Charlie Murphy was talking about seeing Rick James for the first time,
Oh.
Prince, I mean, and seeing the aura around him. Exactly, exactly. Like you see the aura around these
Hmm.
guys when they're walking to the bump to do their warm-ups before the
Right.
first pitch of the game.
Hmm.
There aren't too many of those guys anymore, and I think baseball is at fault at that because, again, and I think we've talked about this several shows ago, where baseball does a terrible job of marketing their guys.
Hmm.
Their guys are just their guys, and they just wind up being their guys. Like Paul Skeens, he needs no marketing. Paul Skeens is just instant ready mix, ready to go. I mean, look at it. The guy's 4-8, and he started the All Star game. Like, when have you
Well,
seen that?
well, the All Star game was a microcosm of Paul Skeens' season. You figure he had
Right,
a 6-0 lead. He was in
right.
line to win the game, and the bullpen blew it. But that's all the case.
But still, though,
Right, 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 right,
it's a
right, right,
different
right,
story when it
right.
comes to that kind of guy. So I think baseball is doing a disservice when it comes to the aura around these guys to be able
Hmm.
to do that. But I digress from what I'm thinking here when it comes to like the way these pitchers go out there, right, and they do their business.
Hmm.
Huge part. It's too much overthrowing, too much just it's no big deal. And I watched the documentary, I want to say this was probably 10, 13 years ago now,
Hmm.
and I really wish that I could remember the name of the documentary, but this gentleman was talking about exactly how the motion of throwing a baseball is probably the most unnatural motion in all of sports. So that right there is already a strain on your shoulder, on your
Yeah.
elbow, because it's just not a natural thing that you do. If you think about it, when you throw something, literally, let's say you're tossing your keys to someone right next to you, or you're tossing something, at work, a pad for someone to write some notes. You're just tossing it. It's no big deal. When you're
Hmm.
actually pitching, you're going through this weird mechanical wind up motion, and
Right.
then putting so much pressure on your shoulder, on your elbow.
Hmm.
So when you combine that with the fact that now these guys feel that they have to ramp it up even more all the time, because like you said, Pedro knew seventh inning, eighth inning, I got to get this guy out. I'm going to
Right.
ramp it up a little bit more. These guys are ramping it up, amped up, coming out the clubhouse on fire. First
Hmm.
pitch of the game, trying to throw 101. And when you're doing that, it's just not feasible
No.
to be expected to make this repeat motion of something that's the most unnatural motion in sports at such a high, strenuous amount on your body. It's not feasible. And that's why I think Tommy John surgery is now the norm as opposed to something that was rare. I wish I would have looked that up, but if you think about it, back in the day, you would hear about it sporadically. Like you would hear, oh, this guy's having Tommy John. Oh no, like it was the death sentence. You know,
Correct.
it was
Correct.
like, oh, this guy's never coming back. Like it's over. This guy's career is washed. Now you look at a guy like Clark Smith. The guy's 29 years old and about to have his second Tommy John
Yeah.
surgery. Like
Yeah.
this is the world we're living in today's pitching. And I think that right there is another thing where the mindset's changing because now it's just like, hey, if I got to get Tommy John, no worries. I'll miss a year. I'll be
Yeah.
back out there.
And to your point, because you and I are old enough to remember when Tommy John actually pitched. And for
Right.
anybody who's checking this out, trust me, we're older than we look. Okay,
And he was a
that's
real pitcher, guys. That's why it was named
right,
after him.
right. And the thing is, people don't realize Tommy John was not the same pitcher after that surgery.
Nope.
Tommy John had to become a junk pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
He was
And
he was the guy from Major League. I cannot remember his name, but
Eddie Harris.
yeah, there we go.
Hey, bartender, Joe Boo needs a refill. Yeah, that's basically who he
Put some
was.
Crisco on there. Give me a couple extra drops on my curve.
Crispo and what was it, jalapeno on his nose or whatever. But yeah, it's like, listen, even to that point, man, you think about some of the great power pitchers, guys that reached 3,000 strikeouts, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, Kurt Schilling, CC Sabathia, guys like that. Yo, they had to learn as they got older, they had to learn to be more of a pitcher. Why? Because their fastball wasn't always going to get people out. I mean, you look at Bartolo Colon, and I mean, Bartolo Colon looks now like Chief Wiggum from The Simpsons, starting, a police fire department softball game on The Simpsons. All right.
Right.
But nonetheless, people forget when Bartolo for Colon first came up with Cleveland. Yo, he was a power pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing was, it was like, yo, as he got older, he had to learn to become a junk pitcher. You go throughout, the history of the game, there's very rare that you could see a guy in the late stages of his career who could consistently say, you know what, I can still get people out with my fastball. Nolan Ryan was the exception. That's why Nolan Ryan has as many strikeouts as he does. Clemens had a run. I mean, you could say what you want, whether it was performance enhanced related or not. But, even with that, in Roger Clemens's heyday, Roger Clemens, his fastball was the real deal. There's not a lot of guys who could say that. And you basically have to go out there and and reinvent the wheel. And I just feel like, it's kind of watered things down, and I know like it's a different era. I get that, but you know, I guess it's because what I was introduced to first, maybe. But I was accustomed that maybe the manager visits the mound once during the game, and that was it. And that's another reason. And MLB didn't talk about it. Why the pace of play had to be adjusted because you have some of these teams that they were making multiple switches per inning, and of course now they had to say now there has to be a three batter minimum. Okay, the whole pitch clock and things like that, a lot of that was factored into that because guess what? Back in the day, there was no bullpen, and even if there was a bullpen, the guys are going multiple innings. I know, Goose Gossage got some flack, and he didn't deserve it because Goose Gossage said, "Hey, you know what? you can't compare me to Mariano Rivera. And a lot of people feel that Mariano Rivera is the best closer of all time. But Goose Gossage was like, hey, listen, I consistently went out there 2 or 3 innings when I, was called upon out of the
Hmm.
bullpen. Mariano only had to deal with 1 inning. And he's right, in that aspect. I mean, it's different eras. But it's just you look at it, the pitchers nowadays, they just have a mindset that once they face a lineup the third time, it's kind of like, oh snap, what do I do? Or even if it's like the fifth inning and on, if they get one or two guys on base, it's kind of like, uh, you know, like they're about to wet their pants. They don't know what to do, and the next thing you know, of course, the manager is taking them out because they don't know how to get out of trouble. I mean, bro, it's like the combined no hitter is like accepted now. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like that's another part of baseball that is just accepted. And it's like even nowadays, if you have a guy who has a no hitter or a perfect game after 7 innings, and we've seen it happen multiple times, it's like, yo, teams are worried about, his pitch count, this, that, and the third. And here's the thing that kills me out of all of it. We're going towards the end of the season. Maybe not now, but like theoretically, just hypothetically speaking. It's your last start of the season. Why the hell are you taking a guy out after 75 pitches?
Right.
Especially if you're not going to the postseason. I'm like, you know what? At that point, yo, go out guns blazing, man. You know what? What do you have to lose, man? And it's like even in the postseason, if you're winning, if we're talking about it's the World Series and you're dialed in, I'm like, yo, keep them out there. I always think back 5 years ago to that World Series, and we will never know what could have been. Game 6, Dodgers and Rays, when the Dodgers could not hit Blake Snell, and of course the analytically driven Rays decided, you know what? I think it was like 5 1/3 innings pitched, and they didn't want Snell to face the Dodgers lineup for the third time. And guess what? The floodgates opened up, and of course, the rest is history, man. So it's just like, analytics, and I know people always hear me talk about analytics. Analytics has their place. I truly do think so.
Hmm.
We've played sports. At some point your instincts have to come into play.
Yep.
Okay, regardless if you're a player or you're a coach, and the coach knows his players better than the players know themselves. And it's like, you know what? You can see if your starting pitcher has it or not. And I think that's where the analytics have taken the thought process and the common sense aspect out of it. And it's just, I really want to see. I mean, I'm sure there's a stat for it if we did the research, but I really would like to see how many guys went out there and had a lead after the seventh inning and the bullpen blew the game. And that right there is another reason why we don't see as many 20-game winners as we used to, because it's like, yo, a guy can go 34 starts in a season, maybe 33. He can probably get 15 wins, but how many no decisions does he get? And that's the other factor right there.
Average innings per pitch in the majors last year
Mm-hmm.
by starters, 5 1/3. That's not going to get it done.
No.
I mean, 5 1/3 is okay if you don't got your good stuff that day. That shouldn't be your average, your normal. That should not. Like, I'm a firm believer. Hey, guess what? Yeah, maybe we don't want these guys out there running out, throwing 8 or 9 innings every night. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but you better give me 6 or 7 good innings if you're considering yourself a starting pitcher. And that's my second point here. The reason that the mentality has changed
Mm-hmm.
is these pitchers, just like the world around us, are being coddled too damn much.
Yeah.
We live in a society right now where everything has to be so super sensitive and so this, so that. And it's no different than these pitchers. They're
Yeah.
coddled. They're coddled. Oh, we don't want you to face the guy a third time. We don't want you to figure it out and figure out how to get this guy out. So we're just going to take you out. Oh, we don't want you to pitch more than 100 pitches, or we don't want you to pitch more than whatever this is. They're being coddled so
Yeah.
much. And
Yeah.
I'm going to direct this one at one particular manager in general who I think started this de-revolution, is what I'd like to call it. And that's
Hmm.
Joe Girardi. Joe Girardi was by far the biggest micromanager that I have ever seen out of a baseball manager. Him and his damn binder. And this dude would micromanage his pitching staff and his bullpen so much that
Hmm.
I believe he's the reason why other teams started to do similar things with micromanaging them.
Hmm.
And then to your point, MLB stepping in and saying, hey, we've got to come up with different rules to stop slowing the pace of the game down. I think he coddled his pitchers way too much.
Hmm.
And I think it's not only just him coddling it, but I also think it's that other thing that we talked about before about managers and coaches looking over their shoulder way much more now than they used to, because you can be fired at any given minute now.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a trickle down. It's a trickle down from the coddling and them really being worried about their own job security
Hmm.
if they make the wrong decision and wrong move. Because guess what? If we're up 4-2 in the sixth inning with one out, pitcher's got two on. Hey, guess what? It's a two-run lead. He's got two on. If we lose this game, I may get fired, especially if we're on a 3-4 game losing streak and we're not where we're supposed to be.
Right.
So now, what do? Oh, let me get this arm in the pin ready who's coming out throwing 98, 99 gas.
Hmm.
Let's do that. And oh, well, maybe this guy doesn't have his good stuff today. So let's get him out of there. Let's get someone else in there. Let's get someone else in there. And it's coddling. You got to let the guy figure out
Right.
what he can do that day.
Right.
Because guess what? We all wake up the same. Hey, today, maybe my skill level at this thing that I'm good at is not as high as it used to be. But
Hmm.
maybe I can figure out what I can compensate that for with something else. No different than a pitcher.
Right.
I may not have my good curveball today. It may be complete crap out there today, but guess what? Pitching is all about up and down, right and left,
Yeah.
changing speeds. You figure it out while you're out there. Now, if a guy's getting shelled, absolutely yank him. But if the guy is figuring it out, let him figure it out. I can't remember how many games I watched as a kid and a teenager and as a younger adult where the pitchers figured it out,
Yeah.
got the guys out, got the game going, and then you go to the pin. Not as soon as the first sign of trouble arises, oh no, we got to get this guy out of there. Yeah, sure. If it's a younger pitcher, absolutely. Because maybe he's not mentally built to weather that storm. But if you're talking a veteran, an all-star, a guy who's won some hardware, let him figure it out. Don't coddle him.
I 100% agree with you there. I think back to Greg Maddux, and this was towards the tail end of Maddox's career when he was pitching with the Padres. And even in his prime, Maddux was never going to overpower you with his fastball. Okay, it was all location, location, location. Maddux, at this point, he was like a six inning guy at this point in his career. He didn't have his stuff one day. I think the Padres were on the road against the Diamondbacks. But Maddox still gave him six innings. He might have given up like 5 runs. But to your point, he figured it out. Why? Because Maddox knew he needed to be out there. The night before, I think the Padres and the Diamondbacks played in like a 14 or 15 inning game. So the bullpen was taxed. So he was like, listen, he still went out there with the mentality, I got to eat innings. I got to give these guys, some rest. And, I think about Justin Verlander when he was in his prime with the Tigers. he was a guy that Jim Leland basically left alone because it was like, you know what? Justin Verlander was one of those guys where if you gave him the ball every fifth day, to to your point, the other team was like, you know what? We ain't got a chance. Okay, and that's why, Justin Verlander has lasted. One of the reasons why Justin Verlander has lasted so long in the bigs is because you think about, okay, his run with Houston was phenomenal. He pitched with Cole, okay, and they won a World Series together. He had a brief tenure with the Mets, went back to Houston, and now, of course, he's with San Francisco. And it's kind of like the same thing with Scherzer, because these guys know how to pitch. They're basically like, de facto coaches for the pitching staff. So now, that's one less thing for the manager to have to worry about. You look at Justin Verlander right now this year. I don't think he's won a game for San Francisco, but it's his presence on that pitching staff, because he knows what it takes. And I mean, to your point, with the mindset, you know, just like it is for starting pitching, it's the same thing with the bullpen. Everybody coming out of the bullpen is not meant to hit 100. I think back to the Nasty Boys with the Cincinnati Reds, and of course, you could have called those guys a wild bunch because they really were. Randy Myers, Rob Dibble, and Norm Charlton, guess what? Those guys were fireballers.
Hmm.
Everybody doesn't have that luxury, when they go, when they go to somebody, coming out of the bullpen. Even a guy like a Aroldis Chapman, he's not what he was, earlier in his career. But, again, at the end of the day, the fastball is probably the easiest pitch to hit in baseball. And I'm not saying that to disrespect it, because if you're throwing 98, it's still hard to catch up on. But you
Right.
figure it's straight at you. There is no movement. And
Hmm.
you look at Clayton Kershaw for an example. What helped Clayton Kershaw throughout his career? Clayton Kershaw he's probably, and especially in his prime, had one of the best 12-6 curves I've ever seen in baseball. Okay, and I mean, I don't know if how much that you got to see Kershaw pitch. I'm sure you definitely did, but
Oh yeah.
nonetheless, it's like he kept you guessing. A guy like Tim Lincecum didn't have the long career um, that he could have had, and honestly, I think it was because of his arm delivery, and it was something that his
Super
dad
funky.
yeah, his dad taught him how to throw like that. And any team that wanted to draft Tim Lincecum, the dad basically told him, "Hey, listen, this is how he pitches. You're going to leave him alone." But
Hmm.
nonetheless, it was effective. And you mentioned, I thought when you said Joe, I thought you were going to say Joe Madden, okay, and
Okay.
not Joe Girardi. But nonetheless, Joe Madden was another guy analytically driven,
Yeah.
with Tampa, that really um took the ball as far as analytics goes, and ran with it. It's like it's one of those things. We know about Billy Bean and everything like that with the Oakland A's, and I feel like a lot of teams around baseball just saw what Oakland did and said, you know what, we could do the same thing. And I think what Tampa did, and the reason why Tampa did it, is because they were and they are a smaller market team. And, the smaller market teams have to get more creative, in how they go out there and compete. And it's just the fact that, so many people have, it's a copycat league, it's a copycat
Mhm.
society, because it's to the point now, it's just like, for various reasons, pitchers aren't even allowed to get to 200 innings. It's like, you know, you'll see teams try to shut a guy down at like 175 because, he might get a bonus, if
Hmm.
he gets to 200, or getting 200 innings is frowned upon when that once upon a time was the norm. I think about it, Robbie Ray, several years ago when he won his Cy Young Award with Seattle. Robbie Ray didn't even reach 200 innings that year. And
Wow.
yeah, I'm going to throw out some stats right here for you. Steve Carlton, okay, 1972, he won the Cy Young's first year with the Phillies, 27 and 10, 1.97 ERA, 346 innings pitched, 310 strikeouts, 1,351 batters faced.
Sheesh.
He came back the next season, lost 20 games, okay, but he still threw 293 innings and had 223 strikeouts. He had 291 innings pitched in 1974. Okay, 1975, 255 innings. 1976, 252. 1977, 283. 1978, 247. 1979, 251. 1980, 304. And this is at the age of 35. 1981, the only reason he threw under 200 innings is because they had to strike that year. Came back at the age of 37 and 82 for the Phillies. Went 23 and 11 with 38 starts, 295 innings pitched, 286 strikeouts. Came back in 83 at the age of 38. The Phillies won the pennant that year, lost to Baltimore in the World Series, through 283 innings. And even in 1984, at the age of 39, he still threw 229 innings. Overall for his career, Steve Carlton threw more than 5,200 innings and he struck out 4,136 batters.
That's impressive. And that's a guy that was not coddled. He
No,
was they let him do his thing.
listen,
And you got to stop saving these guys from themselves because I think some of these managers are, I'm going to save this guy for himself. Hey, why don't you go out there? Why don't you have a conversation with him? Hey, big
and
guy, don't throw 97 every pitch. Maybe dial it down, conserve some energy.
and this is why it's not to cut you off. This is where the analytics gets on my nerves because they're bringing analytical people in and
Mm-hmm.
they're getting rid of the sports people, not just
Yeah.
baseball. It's across sports.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like, Mel Stottlemyre is no longer with us, but I know his son Todd is. And Todd was an okay pitcher, okay,
Mm-hmm.
during his career.
Mm-hmm.
But people forget Mel Stottlemyre was a darn good pitcher in his day,
Yeah.
and he was an even better pitching coach.
Yep.
He was Davey Johnson's right hand man for the '80s Mets, and then of course, once things went south with the Mets, George Steinbrenner had no problem bringing Stottlemyre because Stottlemyre pitched for the Yankees. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
he had no problem, bringing Stottlemyre over to the Bronx. And my point is, wherever Mel Stottlemyre went, that pitching staff got better.
Yep.
Okay. And you think about, Leo Mazzoni for all of those years with Atlanta, where when Tony La Russa left Oakland, what was the first thing that he did? He brought Dave Duncan with him to St.
Yep.
Louis.
Yep.
So it's like, you have to ask these guys, what are they doing? And even when Bruce Bochy, came to Texas, and of course they won the World Series that first year for everything, when you think about the Rangers organization, when you think about the Rangers organization over the years, what's the first thing you think about? Their offense. But look at how much their pitching improved when Bruce Bochy got there because
Mm-hmm.
Bruce Bochy was an all-star catcher during his career with San Diego. Of course, he was front and center. The Padres won the NLS in 96. Of course, they came back and won the pennant in 98. They had Kevin Brown that year. I think Andy Bennis was on that staff. Sterling Hitchcock was on that staff. Guys who knew how to pitch. And then you think about the success that Bruce Bochy had in San Francisco. Matt Cain, Tim Lincecum, Madison Bumgarner. Okay. And then, he brought that with a different cast of guys to Texas, and it worked. So it's one of those where you got to sit back and ask these guys, and we still have some of the great pitchers around. What worked for you? These are the
Mm-hmm.
guys we need to talk to. We need to talk to CC Sabathia. We need to talk to Randy Johnson. We need to talk to Johan Santana. We need to talk to Pedro Martinez. We need to talk to a Roger Clemens, a Kurt Schilling. Okay, Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz. Okay, and I think John Smoltz is probably, in my opinion, one of, if not the most unique players in Cooperstown because
Absolutely.
we're talking about a guy who had 200 career wins and 100 career saves, more than
Mm-hmm.
200 wins and more than 100 career saves. Nobody else can say that.
Right.
Okay. So, these are the guys that, we need to talk to, your Andy Pettitts, of the world and so forth, and say, hey, what worked for you? And again, it's all about location, man. Pitching is about location. Pitching is a science. Pitching is always about keeping your opponent off balance. And we talked Dwight Gooden a little bit earlier. When a guy like Dwight Gooden pitched in his prime, the opposing pitching staff knew, the opposing lineup rather knew, we didn't stand a chance.
Hmm.
You
Like we
know,
hope he doesn't have his stuff today.
exactly. And I think about some guys that put the fear of God in an opposing lineup. I think about Dave Stewart, and Dave Stewart had some phenomenal years, okay, with the Oakland
That was
Athletics.
my guy.
Yeah,
That was my guy.
I think about, Randy Johnson. Randy Johnson was already 6'10". Randy Johnson was so intimidating that Larry Walker, a Hall of Fame hitter, okay, made sure he took himself out of the lineup every time that Randy Johnson pitched. That I'm
He
I'm, I'm
wanted no
serious.
parts.
He
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 wanted
wa-
no parts.
he wanted no parts of the guy. And to your point, it's like you don't have a lot of guys, like that. I mean, I could say maybe a Paul Skeens, but the problem is, it's like put like this: if Paul Skeens were on the Yankees or if Paul Skeens were on the Dodgers, you know what? People would be afraid of him because it's like, you know what? He plays for the Pirates. He plays for a losing organization. He doesn't
Mhm.
stand a chance. But you look at Tarik Skubal, and I like Tarik Skubal, not only the fact that he is a good pitcher, but also he's not afraid of it. And then
Mhm.
also you could see he's a guy that puts fear in opposing lineups, and he's also a guy that wants the ball. He wants the ball in his hands. And that's, it goes back to that mindset. It's like, okay, you know what? I gave you 6 innings and I'm done. We need more guys, and I'm just, I guess, blowing hot air here or going on a fool's errand. But nonetheless, it's like you need more guys with that mindset. But again, it starts from youth baseball. And I think, kids unfortunately are being taught to overthrow. Everybody is not meant to hit 80 or 85 as like a 15 or 16-year-old. I know a guy personally who, his son is a pitcher, and, his son has been working on his velocity, but the guy who he's working with has pitched already. And it's it's not just about the pitching aspect. It's about the strength training, about the flexibility, the mobility, the core. He's not just working on him on throwing. He's teaching him how to be a pitcher. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like not enough people, from a peewee level are doing it. And it's kind of like it's putting some of these kids on a highway to failure.
No, absolutely. And that was actually going to be like my final point was youth sports. Because as always, I think that it always starts at youth sports. But I'm going to spin back real quick to a couple of things you just mentioned. First and foremost, there are no longer those guys out there, or there aren't too many of them, where the clubhouse can look and say, hey, you're going out there and throwing today? Okay.
I got a
Today's
night up.
not Monday. Today's not Tuesday. Today's not Thursday. Today is Wednesday
Yeah,
because you are that guy and you instill confidence in the entire clubhouse
right.
from whether it's the water boy, the dude who's in charge of bubblegum and sunflower seeds, or the manager. You're instilling confidence in the entire clubhouse. There
Right.
aren't too many of those dudes anymore.
No.
And another point that you brought up too, that I think baseball executives need to do a better job with, the lack of quality pitching coaches is in the toilet right now.
And that's because of the
You
analytics.
name, yeah, you name some of the greats: Mel Stoudemire, Leo Mazzoni, Dave Duncan. I mean, these guys right there, like these are pitching coaches that we knew their names.
Rick Honeycutt was another one.
Rick Honeycutt, like we know their names. I can't tell you the majority of these teams' pitching coaches these days
No.
because all he basically is a stopgap in between the pitcher and the manager.
Right.
All he is there to just give that one wasteful conversation to get the guy in the bullpen a couple of extra pitches
Right.
before the manager comes out and yanks the starter or yank whoever is on the hill at that moment. They're no longer, I don't think there is an emphasis placed on them to be important in the game
No.
anymore. I
No.
think they're basically just a placeholder. Here's another guy with a cap and a uniform. Let's just run him out there. You maybe know a little bit about pitching, so let's run you out there. Let's have you talk to the guy, just calm him down, pat him on his butt, and then I'll come get him 2 minutes later. That's basically all what pitching coaches are for nowadays. So those two things right there, the lack of quality pitching coaches, huge thing. And then also the second thing that you mentioned, I totally forgot it right now because I was thinking of my third point. But those things right there, huge. But now I'm going to go back to youth sports. And I think I said this when we were talking about, the Achilles being prevalent in the NBA now. And with the AAU coaches overworking them, not teaching them the fundamentals, the right thing. Same thing goes with baseball, no different.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid playing baseball, I played just about every position there was. When I pitched, I was allowed to throw 3 pitches. I was allowed to throw a fastball, a split finger, or a forkball, whichever one you want to call it,
Hmm.
however you hold a grip, but
Right.
essentially the same kind of pitch. And I was allowed to throw an occasional slider. Anytime I mentioned to my father, coach, anyone, hey, I want to throw a curveball. No, your arm is not ready to throw a curveball. You have to have certain muscles, has to be developed a certain way before we're going to allow you to learn how to throw that pitch and continuously use that pitch in competitive situations to get people out.
Mm.
Now, oh, you want to know how to throw a curveball? Here, this is how you do it. How many times should you throw it? Oh, as many times as you need to throw it to get a guy out. And you're tearing these kids' arms
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
at an
Yeah.
expedited rate
Yeah.
to now their muscles, those ligaments here, because the curveball is all here. It's
Right.
all the ligaments here.
And those are
They're
sensitive,
not
and those
developed.
those are sensitive ligaments to begin with.
Exactly. And now you're asking this kid to throw this pitch maybe, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 times a game. He can't do it,
No.
especially not if you're asking him to do it on a Monday. And then Little League, there's no 5-day rest.
No.
Hey, we got a game on Thursday. Get
No.
back out there, champ. You're our best hope at winning. So they're making these kids or allowing these kids, whichever side of the fence that a listener wants to take here. Either they're allowing them or they're making them. But either way, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, even a 14-year-old should not be throwing a curveball.
No.
There's no way in hell that person should be allowed. Their body's not ready. It's not developed. And now what are you doing? You're making them more susceptible to injury. Now you're making them even more susceptible to injury in the future. And you're ultimately changing the mindset of this pitcher.
Listen, I think back to Barry Zito, and everybody remembers how Barry Zito basically fell off of a cliff once he signed that big deal with San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that came out of Barry Zito's mouth, because I think when Barry Zito got that deal from San Francisco, I think he was like 30 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was still in his prime.
Prime. Yeah.
Barry Zito said he had been throwing changeups and curveballs since he was like 15 or 16 years old. And at that point, it had taken its effect because if you looked at Barry Zito when he was with San Francisco in comparison to Oakland, his curve didn't have the same dip on it that it once did. Barry
Mm-hmm.
Zito was another one of those guys who was a 12-6 guy with his
Big
curveball.
time.
And the thing was, Barry Zito was not a power pitcher. That was Mark Mulder and that was Tim Hudson with that trio that came up together for Oakland at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Barry Zito when he didn't have that dip on his curve anymore, he was useless. He was basically throwing batting practice. And to your
Yep.
point, it goes back, to the overusage from a young age. It's one of those for me. Granted, you played more baseball than I did. You played on higher levels than I did. I never saw a guy that I faced throw a fast. I throw anything other than a fastball,
Right.
and that was youth baseball.
Hmm.
Okay, that was it. It's basically okay. If you're gonna beat me, you're gonna beat my fastball, and that's it. I also think to the point that, and this is because of the analytics as well. We don't have real catchers behind the plates anymore because what's happened, and it's happened probably like for like the last 15, 20 years or so, is once a guy shows offensive prowess, you
Hmm.
know what? They're taking the catching equipment away from him and
Yep.
they're putting him at another position. You think about Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper actually started off as a catcher.
Hmm.
Okay, and of course, once they saw that Bryce Harper was hitting 500-foot bombs as like a 14 or 15-year-old, they're like, all right, you know what? Let's put this guy in the outfield and save him. So you don't have guys back there who have the ability to call a game and manage a pitching staff. And because it's one of those where more often than not, the catcher is like the backbone of the team. The catcher is kind of like the de facto manager
The most
on
important position on the field, in
right.
my opinion.
And that's why, some of them have gone on to, have successful careers as managers. I mean, Joe Girardi, granted it didn't work out for him in Philadelphia. The tail end, and like just switching gears real quick. I know Joe Girardi got a lot of flack at times, but I feel like Joe Girardi, first with the Marlins and then with the Yankees, more often than not, he did more with less. Okay. So, but nonetheless, he knew how to get the most out of a team, and I think it was because of his catching background. Mike Scioscia for so many years at the Angels, Bruce Bochy, was another one. You don't have guys like that anymore. I think the last
Eric
cat,
Wedge, AJ Hinch,
right?
catchers.
I think the last guy that we had like that who knew how to manage a pitching staff behind the plate was Yadier Molina. And that's one of the reasons why I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer because in my opinion,
Oh yeah.
I thought Pudge was the best defensive catcher that I ever saw. I think Yadier is better than him, okay, as a defensive catcher. And
I'll throw Benito Santiago in there too.
okay, definitely, definitely. You can't go wrong with him either. But my point is, Yachty knew how to manage a pitching staff. And
Hmm.
I never forget what Yadier Molina did, and it didn't even have to do anything with one of his pitchers. You go back to the 2013 MLB All-Star game. It was at Citi Field in New York. Matt Harvey, who was supposed to be the next big thing, okay,
Hmm.
until he had arm issues. Matt Harvey got to start that night, for the National League. And it was a who's who, in the American League starting lineup that year. Mike Trout, Jose Bautista, David Ortiz. We can go right down the list. So the first couple of guys that Matt Harvey faced, they got on base because his fastball wasn't moving, and I think he was pressing. Yachty went out there, talked to him, was like, "Yo, just throw to me." Long story short, Matt Harvey got through 2 innings, didn't give up one single out. Why? Because instead of Matt Harvey trying to get everybody out, Yachty calmed him down and Yachty had him pitch to contact. And then next thing you know, it was a fly ball to Bryce Harper out in the center. It was a fly ball to Carlos Gonzalez, in left field and things like that. It's like, yo, that's where a quality catcher comes into play. And going back to Joe Girardi, that's one of the reasons why the Yankees kept him around as a player because, and this is no disrespect to Jorge Posada because the job was going to be Posada's eventually, but they felt like he wasn't ready. And it was like, listen, you had that guy Girardi who could start a game for them like once a week, but then on top of that, he was another coach on the field, and
Hmm.
he was like I'm not going to say a buffer between Joe Torre and Jorge Posada. But you know what? And we've all been like this on teams where the coach's message is a coach's message, but sometimes if you hear it from one of your teammates, it just resonates a little bit different.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it was one of those deals. with Jorge Posada, and Posada went on to be one of the best catchers in Yankee history. But my point is, it's like they've taken away from the science that is being a catcher because basically a quality catcher went out there and made life easy, for his starting pitcher. You know, we talked about Dwight Gooden, okay, and of course Dwight Gooden mid '80s, one of the best.
Hmm.
I think the origins for that started in 1984. You remember, I think Dwight Gooden was like the youngest pitcher. He didn't start that game for the National League, but he was
Hmm.
one of, if not the youngest
I think
pitchers.
it was 19 or 20.
He was 19 years
Yeah.
old. Okay. And Gary Carter was catching for the National League. Gary Carter at that time was still catching for the Expos.
Hmm.
And, Gary talked to him, and I think Doc struck out the side. And then, of course, a year later, the Mets made the trade with Montreal to get Gary Carter. And then it was one of those things where, like, Gary Carter was a phenomenal hitter, clutch, always came up in the clutch, regardless of where he
Hmm.
played, which team he played for. But I don't think Gary Carter got enough credit for his ability to, operate a pitching staff. And it's like, if anybody remembers, once Gary Carter came to the Mets already had a good pitching staff. He made a good
Hmm.
pitching staff great. So
Hmm.
again, my point is, I think the analytics have taken away from the importance of having that quality catcher behind the plate because
Yeah.
your catcher knew all of your ins and outs. And you mentioned Major League before. That was one of the reasons why Cleveland brought in Jake Taylor because like Lou Brown told him, he was like, listen, I need somebody who's going to manage his pitching staff, and
Right.
Jake Taylor did. That's what your veteran catchers did.
And if you look at major league rosters, so even if you didn't have a catcher as your everyday catcher, you still had a veteran guy in that locker room who knew how to talk to the pitching staff. He
Yeah,
knew how to call a game. He knew
yeah,
how to impart wisdom and knowledge on that younger catcher. I'll
yeah.
use the Yankees as a perfect example. Last year, they ran with two catchers, Jose Trevino and Austin Wells.
Hmm.
Austin Wells is supposed to be the new young guy who's supposed to hit the ball all over the yard and be a stud catcher, so to speak. So
Hmm.
what do? In the offseason, they decide to let Trevino go. We're not going to use you as much. We're going to get a guy, JC, I can't remember his last name, but the guy was doing Uber Eats and DoorDash last year.
Yeah.
So we're going to get him to be the backup catcher. We're going to let Trevino go. And we've got all the faith and confidence in Austin Wells because he shows occasional power. They're putting too much emphasis on wanting premium production at the plate from the catcher position
Yeah.
and not actually allowing the catcher to do what he's supposed to do and manage the pitching staff. I
I'm
have
sorry.
no clue why the Yankees let Trevino walk because that guy knew how to handle his staff. Here's how you can always tell a guy who knows how to handle his staff. When the ace says, that's my guy. I don't care if this other guy's hitting 275 with 20 bombs at the All Star break.
Hmm.
I want the guy that's hitting 212 with three homers catching my games because he knows what I want, where I want it. He knows how to call it. He knows how to handle this game. And to your point, the analytics come in. Well, hey, this guy's hitting 212 with three home runs. This guy's hitting 275 with 20 bombs. Let's throw this guy in there. But they're not thinking how it's affecting that pitcher that day or that
Hmm.
entire pitching staff.
Listen, yo, you hit the nail right on the head. And like one guy, and I mean, he's not the only one, but I think back to like when Clayton Kershaw was in his prime. I think, Clayton Kershaw kept basically single-handedly kept AJ Ellis on the Dodgers roster for several years because
Mhm.
that was his personal catcher. I think back to about 20 years ago when the Boston Red Sox got rid of Doug Mirabelli, and he was
Mhm.
the only guy who knew how to catch the knuckleball
Right.
from Tim Wakefield, and then Tim Wakefield was struggling. to the point that they had to get Doug Mirabelli back
Right.
from San Diego. And when he got traded, basically the police cruiser met him at the airport, and he literally changed into his uniform in the police cruiser as they were driving to the stadium. And I think he got there maybe in time for the second inning at Fenway, and then he went and caught Tim Wakefield.
Mhm.
So it's like, listen, like I feel like they've kind of tried and not even tried, they've succeeded as far as making the catching position unimportant, kind of like the backup quarterback position in the NFL. And the reason why I say it is, you see a lot of teams now in the NFL, just because they draft a quarterback in round number one, they've got to throw him out there right away as a starter. And then they have, some backup quarterback from Belt Parkway Community College, as opposed to having a veteran who's kind of been there and done it. Just switching gears to football real quick. You look at the Giants this year. They did what they should have done a long time ago. You drafted a quarterback in the first round in Jackson Dart. Okay, what do? You bring in Russell Wilson and you bring in Jameis Winston, veteran guys who, have played the position. Catching is no different because
Right.
you have to know everything on the fly because as a catcher, you've got to know your pitcher's strengths and weaknesses, and you have to know everything for the opposing lineup.
Yep.
And if you're coming in with a guy, you know, from the bullpen in the seventh inning, you know what? There's no notebook for you or no phone for you to go and see like, hey, well, you know what? This guy likes this guy doesn't like that. No, it's a process, my man. You have to
Right.
know your ins and outs, man. And I just feel like, they have just taken away from that. And I think that right there, you don't have a lot of uh, catchers anymore who really know how to call a game. It's like now they've got the headsets in there. They're over there, looking, at the manager, what do I do? This, that, and the third. Whereas, I think about a guy, you mentioned Benito Santiago. I think about another one of the great Hispanic catchers that I don't think he gets enough credit for. That was Tony Pena. Tony
Oh
Pena
yeah.
made several All-Star teams, whether it was with St. Louis or Pittsburgh,
Hmm.
not because of his bat, but Tony Pena was phenomenal behind the plate, not just calling a game, but also Tony Pena was a phenomenal defensive catcher as well.
Which is why
Okay,
he was a long-time bench coach too.
yes, yes, absolutely. And I think Joe Torre kept him around for quite some
Oh
time
yeah.
with the Yankees. So it's things like that, and those guys that we mentioned, whether it was Benito Santiago, um, Gary Carter, Tony Pena, we can go right down the list. Those guys worked at their craft.
Hmm.
They truly took the time to work with their craft. And it's just like, I feel like, now it's almost like, yo, we could just put anybody behind the plate. And I think one thing that scared a lot of people off was Joe Mauer. And no, nothing against Joe Mauer. Joe Mauer was 6'5", and I think the Twins at one point they just were afraid of not having his bat because Joe Mauer was hitting so well. I think Joe Mauer had some years where he was hitting like 350 or 360,
Hmm.
and I think they were just worried about losing his offensive production. And then, of course, once Justin Morneau got older, and then they were like, all right, we're going to shift him to first base. But it's just like, listen, the catcher is so important to a team, and he's so important to the psyche of a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when a guy gets older, I get it.
Hmm.
Moving to first base, DH, the knees aren't
Right.
holding up as much as they used to. Lower
Naturally,
back is bothering
naturally,
you, that stuff.
naturally, naturally.
But don't do that to a guy
It's like
when
24, 25.
yeah. And I mean, think about it, like he's learned this skill because it's a skill how to handle a pitching staff and
Hmm.
how to see the game from that position. He's learned this skill from 8, 9, 10 years old.
Right.
and he has this skill at 25, and he's one of the best in the world at this. And now you want to rob him of this skill. Like that's the thing that analytics doesn't take account of
Right.
is there's no stat for that kind of stuff.
Right.
There's no OPS plus this, and there's no whip, and there's no this, and
Right.
like there's no stat for that. Maybe if these guys who are so smart can come up with a stat for this, then maybe they can truly give the credit to these guys that they deserve because handling a pitching staff is tough. But take it from a guy who was not a full-time catcher, but had to catch occasionally. It's rough.
No, it is.
It takes certain elements from your game because
Yeah.
if it's a game where I'm at my natural position, the third or short, it's rinse and repeat. It's just regular how it is. And I'm focused on making the right play and I'm focused on getting up to the dish and doing what I need to do there.
Right.
Now, if you throw me at the catcher position, guess what? I'm probably not going to hit so great because my mind is so many other places that it
Hmm.
has to be when you're playing that position. So I think that, somewhere along the way, again, some catcher had this monster year, and all of a sudden now, hey, I need my catcher to do that. I need my
Yeah.
catcher to do that. I need my catcher to do that. And now we take the emphasis off of the importance of what the catcher actually is,
Yeah.
and we're going to put it to all of this stuff. Hey, this guy can hit 30 home runs and he can hit 280, but he can't call a game to save his life. Oh, we'll figure that out.
Yeah, like listen, I mean, a lot of, has been made about Cal Raleigh this season because, of the fact that, he's going to be just a second Seattle player to hit 50 home runs in the season. I think Griffey did it twice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But nonetheless, that's what has put him in the AL MVP discussion with Aaron Judge, in spite of the fact that Judge is hitting about 100 points higher than Cal Raleigh. But
Right.
it's like people are like, hey, you know what? He's got to squat behind the plate for 9 innings, and then he has to stand up and do this 3 or 4 times a game, and it's not easy. And I mean, that's what, pissed me off when a guy like Mike Piazza didn't get into the Hall of Fame like his first couple of times because I'm like, listen, this guy squatted behind the plate for 9 innings, still hit north of 300 for his career.
Mm-hmm.
I think Piazza hit, I think he had more home runs and more doubles than any other, catcher in MLB history. And then you
Mm-hmm.
think about guys like Pudge and Johnny Bench. And I'm talking about when I say Pudge, I mean Carlton Fisk, okay?
Yeah.
And
The real Pudge.
right, right, so I just felt like it was it was a slap in the face. And then for a guy to switch positions, it was a big thing. I remember you might remember this. Craig Biggio, when he first came up in the
Oh,
Astros
he was a
organization,
catcher.
he was a catcher.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why Houston switched him was because of his speed.
Mm-hmm.
That was the main reason why they switched him. And of course, it worked out. Hall of Fame career, 3,000 plus hits, World Series champ. No, no, I take that back. He wasn't.
No, they
No,
didn't.
no, no, they got to the World Series.
Yeah.
Okay, but nonetheless, still one of the greatest players in that franchise's history.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was one of those, not to say you were kind of you played the cards you were dealt with, but it was just like, yo, in those days, guys were groomed for the position. It's kind of like, relief pitchers. You basically became a relief pitcher if you couldn't get it done as a starter. I think about like Billy Wagner. That's, how he ended up being a reliever. Mariano Rivera, and I'm old enough to remember when Mariano first came up with the Yankees, and the Yankees had him as a starter, and he could give you one or two quality innings, and after that, the floodgates opened up, and eventually the Yankees were like, all right, you know what, we're going to make you the setup guy for John Wetland. When
Mm-hmm.
John Wetland left in free agency, okay, the job is yours. The rest is history. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
my point is, it's like nowadays, it's kind of like you're basically bringing up guys as relievers, the hard throwing, you name it, and it's just like everything, to me, I just truly feel is out of whack. I mean, even I know that there was more effort in this year's All-Star game. I know MLB, has been trying to to improve things. But it's just like I was just looking at some of the batting averages. I mean, you got guys out there who are hitting like 260, 270, and they're considered all-stars.
Hmm.
And I remember a time when like a guy was hitting like 315 and he was like one of the lower tier all-stars. I mean, I saw a stat the other day and I posted this online, and the stat is still holding true because, we're at the all-star break right now. Did you know right now, not one single batter in the National League is hitting over 300?
That's crazy. I did not know that.
Yes.
Like that's
Freddie
wow.
Freeman, I think, is leading the NL in batting, and it's like maybe around 295, something like that.
And I see that to me has to do with what's that one stat that I hate the most? I don't mind exit velocity. I don't mind that one at all. Launch angle. I hate launch angle because all it's doing is telling you to not do what you've been taught your entire childhood. Entire
Right.
childhood, you were taught to swing the bat level. You
Yes.
want line drives. Launch angle is making these guys want to golf everything. And what happens when you golf everything? It's three possibilities: home run, pop fly, strikeout. That's it.
Listen, Dave Kingman was like 40 years too early in his MLB career. And I'll tell you
Mhm.
like this, another guy that like people might have forgotten his name. Willie Mo Pena would have made a killing right now in baseball. Okay. And you're laughing because clearly you remember who he was.
Oh yeah.
But if anybody remembers Willie Mo Pena, basically he was he was a real life Pedro Serrano. He would put on a display in batting practice, and he couldn't hit the broadside of the bus in during the game. But I guarantee you, the way things are now, with like swinging for the downs, he would have found a way on somebody's roster.
Oh,
You know.
absolutely. I mean, just to kind of go back to where we started this off, the mindset is just so different. And
Hmm.
my final point with everything here is you brought it up. Back in the days, every pitcher was a starting pitcher. You were raised as a starting pitcher. You were
Right.
trained as a starting pitcher,
Right.
and you wound up as a relief pitcher based on either inability to get it done for the long haul
Hmm.
or just the fact that the starting five was just that damn good that you had to be relegated to the bullpen. Not
Right.
saying that you weren't a bad pit, you were a bad pitcher, but it's just
Right.
like these five guys are lights out.
Right.
Now, guys are actually being brought up as relief pitchers. Hey,
Hmm.
you can throw 103. That might not be sustainable for 5, 6, 7 innings, but that'll work for one or two.
Yeah.
So get in the bullpen and throw your arm out. That's what we need you for.
But he,
That right there is such a disservice to younger pitchers because, hey, guess what? Maybe all right now I'm showing is velocity, but with the right pitching coach, with time, maybe I can learn to actually be a pitcher and not a thrower. Maybe I can actually learn how to move the ball north and south, east and west, change my velocities to keep hitters off guess or off guessing. Like maybe I can do that type of stuff with time. Guess
hmm
what? In today's coddled microwave society, we want to rub your back and we want to get the job done as soon as possible. And that's why now these pitchers are now being raised and groomed as relief pitchers. We never saw that. There was no
no,
such thing as a relief
no.
pitcher coming up when we were younger, coming up through the little league ages, high school.
Hmm.
No such thing as this guy's just a relief pitcher. It was, hey, guess what? My starter is looking crap. So the guy who was supposed to start tomorrow or maybe the next day, he's coming in
Right.
relief because he's
Right.
getting shelled. That
Right.
was it. The mentality, the mindset has changed. And unless something is done about it, we're not even finished seeing the worst of this.
Nah, you're 100% right. I know, like, I think it was after last season when, Rob Manfred, or Colonel Clink, whatever you want to call him, basically, said that the amount of Tommy John surgeries is alarming and we need to like do some research on it. I'm like, dude, it's a common sense thing. I'm like, listen, guys are overthrowing. It's like even if you look at the way that guys are throwing the ball, period, and it's just like to the trained eye who's seen baseball enough, you know when a guy is overthrowing or not.
Oh yeah.
You look at a guy like Clemens, all right, and I know that, Clemens, gets some flack, you know, with possible connections to performance enhancing drugs. And I say possible because, again, Clemens, like Bonds and like several other guys, never failed the drug test, okay?
Right.
But my thing is this, you look at Clemens' time with the Red Sox.
Red Sox and Toronto. Let's just take those into yeah.
He would he was throwing gas, okay? But the thing is, Roger Clemens is a big country guy from Texas.
Hmm.
Okay, so it's natural to him. Okay, he could just sit back and throw gas. Nowadays, you see guys that they don't look like guys who could throw gas, and because of that, they're overthrowing. It's
Five,
like
10, 180 pounds.
right. It's basically when you ask somebody to do something physically that they can't do, more often than not, it's a recipe for disaster. It's like saying, you know what? You're telling TJ Watt of the Pittsburgh Steelers, you know what? We want you to drop back in coverage and cover Tyreek Hill, man to man. There's only a matter of time before TJ Watt, injures his hamstring. Why?
No, he's
Because
tearing something. Yeah.
you're asking him to do something that he's not capable of doing. Or on the flip side, you know what? That's like asking Tyreek Hill, Tyreek, stay in and pick up TJ Watt and blitz protection. It's a recipe for disaster. And it's
Overcompensation.
right. And it's kind of like the same thing right now with the pitching. It's like you're asking guys to do something that they're not capable of. And again, I cannot harp on this enough. Everybody is not built to throw 98, 99, 100 miles an hour each pitch. And even the guys that do have that, it's one of those where um even they have to pick their spots. I I treat it like, like Nas. You think about like the Fast and the Furious movies,
Yep.
or even like anybody who watches IndyCar, they have like the drivers have to push to pass. You have
Hmm.
like I think like 2 minutes worth of push to pass for each
Hmm.
race. You're not going to use your push to pass at every single point of the race. You're going to use it at that point when you need, you just need that little extra boost to try to get past the guy on the straightaways, this, that, and the third. Pitching is no different. I mean, if you played like once, Sony really got involved in things and the technology that went into video games, went through the roof. You
Hmm.
think about like MLB The Show or like MVP baseball games like that. If you overthrew as a pitcher, 9 times out of 10, it wasn't going to work.
Right.
And that's in a video game. The
Yeah.
video game for that aspect ain't no different from real life.
No.
You know what I'm saying? But it's just like, we know that. But the problem is, it's like, I guarantee you, if a Greg Maddux or a Pedro Martinez or a Tom Glavine walked into one of these pitching clubhouses and started talking with these kids about pitching, the analytic people would stand up and tell him that he's wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And here's something that's crazy. So let's go back to the pitching coaches like we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not put as like a desirable position.
No.
Because if you think about it, some of the great minds that you named that are living, that pitch the game, 300 wins, 3,000 strikeouts, maybe they didn't hit those, maybe they're right underneath those, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
None of these guys are pitching coaches.
None.
John Smoltz does a
None.
great job, phenomenal job for Fox. You don't think he could help somebody's rotation bullpen right now? CC Sabathia is just hanging out, going to fundraisers and galas. You
Hmm.
don't think he could help somebody's pitching staff and rotation right now? Like it's crazy that the GMs, the presidents of player personnel, these guys are not doing a better job of trying to get some of these guys back into the fold. Like, I'm sorry, Matt Blake, don't have a problem against you, but CC Sabathia would be a much better pitching coach than you for the Yankees. He pitched for the Yankees. He pitched well for the Yankees amongst other teams, and I think he could have a little bit more wisdom to impart than Matt
Hmm.
Blake right now at this point.
Oh, listen, I mean, totally. I mean, I listen to Pedro Martinez talk,
Oh,
pitching
I love him on TBS, man.
on TBS, and I think another guy who's great as well, Dan Plesac on the
Yep,
MLB Network,
yep.
and it's like I like Dan Plesac has periodically done demos on there, and you look
Mm-hmm.
at Dan Plesac as an older guy. Dan Plesac still has the ability to locate. Okay,
Yeah.
basically, Dan Plesac even did it. I forgot who was catching for him on the demo one time on MLB Network, and it was basically like, listen. I want to go outside. And he threw that pitch on a dime. He painted the corner of the plate. Those people, you get people out there who are critical of John Smoltz because they just want to be entertained, in listening to a game and actually, instead of actually, learning the fundamentals of the game. I love to hear John Smoltz talk because John Smoltz will talk the ins and outs of baseball. The times that, I know when Ron Darling works for TBS, and I know I've heard he gets a lot of credit, in New York with his coverage of the Mets. Ron Darling is another guy. Ron Darling is a former pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
These guys know the ins and outs of the game. And it's kind of like, just like it is, um, in football and other sports, it's kind of like the guys who've been there, done that, you know what? We're shunning those guys out and, bringing other people in. And it's kind of like it's a slap in the face because, these guys know what it takes to be successful. And I'm like, I don't know about you, but anytime that I have embarked on anything that I've done in my life, as an adult at least, I have always sought out somebody who's been there and done that because
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, what did you do? And maybe I might not do steps 1 through 10 like you did, but I'm still going to sit back and
Right.
listen and see how I can incorporate at least some of what you did into what I'm doing to make me more successful. And I think,
Exactly.
and I think, MLB has done a bad job in that as far as, shunning, their vets aside because it's not just the pitching coaches. It's like if you look at a lot of these staffs now,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a lot of hitting coaches who, were at the major league level. First base coaches or third base coaches. A lot of these guys never even cracked the major league level.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the Dodgers. The Dodgers have Mark Pryor as their pitching coach. Mark Pryor could have had a more successful MLB career as a starting pitcher, but of course, injuries really derail that. And I feel like, when you sit back and you're looking at the coaching staffs for a lot of these clubs, you're kind of like, at the beginning of Major League when they broke spring training and everybody was sitting around the diner and they had the newspaper and they're looking at the roster and like,
Who is this
who,
guy?
who, who are these guys? You know what I'm saying? And it's basically, the same thing, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, and then I don't know 100%, but this is my theory. I think this is where again the GMs are missing the ball because I think they're using analytics to hire the staff as well.
Bingo.
And I don't think that they're going, this guy's a proven vet. This guy played 12 years in the league. This guy did this guy did that. It's, oh yeah, this guy's heard of and he only cost 150K a year. So
Yeah.
let's get this guy because his
Yeah.
position's not important.
Yeah.
The bench coach in baseball, in my opinion, is the most underappreciated coaching position in all of sports. Here's why I say this. Assistant coaches in other sports, they get a lot of credit. Eventually, they wind up getting head roles somewhere else.
Hmm.
Assistant coach in basketball, football. It's always the new hot list of names for when, 2 years later, after this guy's done a good job on a playoff consistent team or championship team, his name's being thrown in the list of guys to possibly take over another place.
Hmm.
MLB bench coaches are not. And I don't know why. And it's crazy to me when I look at that role in the game of baseball.
Hmm.
I'm a big mob historian guy. I watch all the documentaries, movies, and all of that. The consigliere is, without question, the most important role after the boss in a mob family because he is who the Don relies on. He's who the Don listens to, gets the information from. Know that they've been around the block a time or two. He has their ear. A lot of times the boss and the underboss are not on the same page. The underboss is doing his own thing as
Right.
long as it's underneath the family rules. But the
Hmm.
consigliere is the guy who is really step by step putting everything together with the Dawn. That essentially, in my opinion, is who the bench coach is in MLB. He's the
Right.
consigliere of that team because, hey, you're a smart guy in whatever this field is, with mob, if it's racketeering and all of that other kind of stuff, whatever. If it's baseball, it's baseball. Most of the time, the bench coach is an ex catcher. It's someone who you can
Yeah.
pick their brain.
Yeah.
Hey, this is the situation we're in right now. Remember that time back in 2002 when you were in a similar situation than this? How did
Hmm.
you guys handle it?
Yeah.
That's what the manager can do with that. And again, if you look around the league at all 32 teams, at all 30 teams,
Hmm.
we probably don't even know 20 of these bench coaches by name.
No. No, honestly, it's to the point like you don't even know some of the managers by name because it's
Yeah.
just like, it's like just some dude who's there just to, do the bidding of the general manager because the general manager is basically calling the shots. And in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of cases, the general manager is the puppet master, and the manager in some cases is the puppet. Very rarely now, to your point, do you have a bench coach who is like a worthwhile big league guy. I think about it, Joe Torre during his time with the Yankees. For so many years, he had Don Zimmer there. And of course, some people might think about Don Zimmer and of course, the run in, many years ago with Pedro Martinez. But, Don Zimmer played baseball,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
It was a
and
pretty damn good manager.
right. He had a run with the Cubs. I think Zim was the Cubs manager when they won the NL East back in 1989. They got to the LCS, they lost.
Yeah.
I think they lost to San Francisco in like 5 games, something like
Yeah, I
that.
want to say mid 80s to about mid 90s. He
Right.
was he was in
Right.
place there.
Right. And I think at one point he was with Tampa as well. But you know what? He was like a confidant of Joe Torre. And I think about a
Mm-hmm.
guy, Billy Martin. Okay. Um,
Yogi.
Billy Martin, and people always said this about him. Billy had the ability to manage 2 or 3 innings ahead.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And that was because Billy was cerebral, as far as, his approach. Sparky Anderson
But look at
was,
Billy's bench coach though. It was Yogi Berra.
there you go.
You know what I
There,
mean? Like
there you
this
go.
is yeah, like these are not these are
Yeah,
Yogi Berra, in my opinion, is one of the greatest catchers of all time because of not only what he was able to do as a signal caller behind the plate, but also his offense. Man, the
correct.
guy finished in the top five in AL MVP voting for like 10 years.
Yeah, that's unheard of for a catcher,
Right.
you know?
But that's that baseball mind that you have. That's that consigliere that you can
Right,
have. Hey,
right,
Yogi, this is some crazy stuff going on right now. What
right.
should we do? Have you ever seen this before?
Right. No, listen, it's taken away from it. I mean, a guy like Bobby Cox. Bobby Cox was, as sharp as a wit, you know, in that clubhouse. But the thing is like Bobby Cox always made it his business to keep, quality coaches around him. Leo Mazzoni, Pat Corrales, we can go right down the list. Dusty Baker was another one. That's why Dusty won every single spot
Mhm.
that he went to. I don't think that Dusty Baker managed a team that didn't get to the playoffs at least once with him.
No,
I really don't think so.
no.
And it's one of those where, of course, I was so happy for Dusty Baker when he finally got his championship a couple of years ago with Houston because,
Mhm.
he had been so close, but it was just like, listen, you know, he Dusty Baker was a great manager because, and he wasn't the only one, but he knew the strengths and weaknesses of his teams, and he knew to get the how to get the ins and the outs, and that's that comes from playing the game, and that comes from knowing the game, and I think again that's something that analytics doesn't account for because when you're relying on a computer, the computer doesn't factor in the human element. You know what I'm saying?
None
It's
whatsoever.
it's like saying, well, you know what? This guy averaged, 24 and 17, 24 points and 17 rebounds in the NBA. Okay, what was the team's win-loss record? See,
Right.
those are things that they don't account for. I always remember the story where and this guy told me this story about Ralph Kiner.
Mhm.
And Ralph Kiner, phenomenal power hitter, late great Ralph Kiner. He was also a guy that, his career was cut short due to a back injury. But nonetheless, with Ralph Kiner, it was one of those where he wanted more money, from the Pirates at one point. It was basically like, well, we could finish in last without you. You know what I'm saying? And that was the old school mindset, when it came to general managers and owners. I'm like, listen, okay, you might have hit 40 home runs, but hey, I'm not going to sit up there and pay you money to lose 90 games.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just a difference in mentality, man.
And that mentality has
Yeah.
changed truthfully too, because guess what? Now, if a guy can hit you 40 home runs and you end up in last place, guess what? I can still sell a bunch of bobbleheads and t-shirts and jerseys and, still make some type of light at the end of the day with it.
There you go. I mean, people are already trying to throw, Paul Skeens a life raft in Pittsburgh, and of course, the Pirates, the Pirates, the Pirates are not going to trade because they are going to eventually trade Paul Skeens.
They've got
Okay,
to. Yeah.
they're not going to do it until they absolutely have to because if you are Pittsburgh,
Hmm.
what else do you have on that team? At least you can give your fans, and I have been to PNC Park before.
Hmm.
Put it on your bucket list to go. One of the best ballparks in baseball.
Yeah, you were telling
Okay,
me.
it's not even close. But nonetheless, you at least give the fans in Pittsburgh something to get excited for once a week. And, just switching gears real quick, it is so bad in Pittsburgh right now. The same people who booed and threw batteries at Barry Bonds when he left to go to San Francisco have now embraced him.
Hmm.
Okay, because guess what? Look at how bad it's been for the past 3 decades there. Okay, so a guy like Paul Skeens, at least he gives the Pirates fans something to poke their chest out about once a
Right.
week. You know what I'm
If
saying?
I'm if I'm Pittsburgh's GM though, I'm
Hmm.
I'm I'm packaging Skeens and O'Neill Cruz for any organization's top 10 prospects in their pipeline.
It well,
Because if because both of those guys are super, super talented and
hmm
have the ability to be Skeens, no doubt, a potential Hall of Famer one day, maybe Cruz. We'll see how that goes.
hmm
But I mean, you gotta sell high. You gotta get some type of return. Hey, guess what? If I can get 10, let's be reasonable, 8 top prospects for those two guys,
yeah.
and guess what? Now you're fielding your entire team maybe 2 or 3 years from now, and maybe you can do something with that.
You've got to be very smart about it because it's like more often than not, historically, it doesn't work. And the reason, like, I remember a couple of years ago when Baltimore knew that they weren't going to be able to resign Manny Machado, and they
Mm.
traded him to
They
the
get him for
Dodgers,
nothing.
right? And they traded him to the Dodgers. Dodgers gave up five prospects, and all five of those guys, nobody ever heard of.
Right.
Okay. On the flip side, when San Diego, traded traded for Juan Soto, they
Mhm.
gave the Padres, I mean, they gave the Nationals Mackenzie Gore. I forgot who else was involved in that trade. And then, of course, when the Yankees turned around and picked up Juan Soto,
Well, the big guy who's killing it right now for Washington, CJ Abrams.
right. Okay. And then when the Yankees turned around and picked up Soto from San Diego, they gave up, who was it?
Michael King.
Michael King. It was somebody else involved in that deal
There's a
as well.
couple other prospects mainly, but King was the big
Right.
headliner in there.
Right.
Yeah.
But like more often than not, when like the big names are traded, I feel like most of the guys don't work out. I mean, I always remember hearing the story
Mhm.
where, when Tom Seaver got, famously traded from the Mets to the Reds. Story was that the Dodgers gave the Mets a better offer, but I think it was M. Donald Grant who owned the Mets at the time rather. He didn't want to trade Tom Seaver to a big market in, like LA because he was worried about him going out there and being a star. Long story short, the Dodgers basically came to the Mets with a list of their top 10 prospects in their
Hmm.
system. And they said, hey, you could have any three of these guys that you want along with Don Sutton.
Hmm.
One of the guys on that list was Pedro Guerrero.
Wow.
Exactly. And if anybody has followed, the Dodgers throughout the years, the Dodgers have always had a pipeline as far as MLB talent. You think about it. I mean, we saw something in the 90s from the Dodgers that we may never see again. I think it was like 5 or 6 years in a row where they
Mhm.
had National League Rookie of the Year. It was Eric Karros, Mike Piazza, Raul Mondesi,
Mhm.
Todd Hollinsworth, Hideo Nomo.
The only
Um,
thing I can think close to that is the A's when they had that run of Chavez and Tejada and all of those dudes like that. Like
right.
that's the only thing that I can think of that's anything close, but it still didn't compare.
No, and you're never going to see anything like that again. And it's like you think about it, the Dodgers organization is so deep that they have let guys go in free agency and they haven't skipped a beat. People forget that
Mhm.
Adrian Beltre, started off with the Dodgers.
Right.
A Cody Bellinger, they were able to get off of Cody Bellinger, who looks like he's about to get paid. A Corey Seager, and we could just go right down the list of so many guys. But nonetheless, the Dodgers organization has always just had a history of doing that. But nonetheless, getting back to the Manny Machado thing, they traded Baltimore. They willingly gave Baltimore five guys, and none of those guys worked out.
Yeah, and that's great. And that's the crapshoot when anytime you're trading for prospects, it's a
Hmm.
little bit more clear and clairvoyant when
Hmm.
you're talking NBA and NFL.
Right.
But MLB is such a crapshoot because the poster child for this, Josh Hamilton. There's a guy supposed to be like can't miss prospect. Like he was the guy who was supposed to be can't miss.
Right.
And then substance abuse, he's out of the league forever. And then he comes back. And then he had a couple of years where
Right.
he kind of reached his potential, so to speak. You just
Correct.
never know. And that's the dangerous thing right there. But in my opinion, with that, they've got to figure out something before losing him for nothing. Because I mean, look
Oh
at
yeah.
look at Garrett Cole, how they lost him for almost nothing to Houston.
Yeah, and it's like I mean, like there's the same thing with McCutcheon. I mean, Andrew McCutcheon, he came back to finish his career in Pittsburgh, but of course, when it came time for him to get paid,
Hmm.
he eventually left. I mean, McCutcheon was an MVP for the Pirates, a big part of their revitalization,
Hmm.
a little bit more than 10 years ago with Clint Hurdle as a manager. I remember Jason Grilly was a part of that team. Pedro Alvarez. We can go right down the list. But yeah, it's one of those things where you've got to hit on those things. And I mean, the thing is, it's like, speaking of the Pirates, I mean, for the fact that Ben Cherington still has a job, he has pictures on somebody. Okay, he knows something. you know.
Incriminating evidence.
But yeah, I mean, overall, it's just a mindset, and it's changed, and flat out, it's hurting the game.
Absolutely, man. And hopefully, I don't see it getting better anytime soon, but
Man.
hopefully we go away from analytics to your point, because analytics is the thing that I think that's going to drive us deeper and deeper in this doldrum, so to speak, that we're in right now. Like we've got to cut the cord, and we've got to just go back to this is my gut. I'm going to stick with my gut, win or lose. And like I said earlier, Joe Girardi and his damn binder, like that dude, every time I saw him with that binder, I'm like, you're a baseball guy. You know baseball is not in a binder.
Listen, some guys just know it. I always remember this story when um when Sparky Anderson was managing the Tigers. And Travis Fryman, who I always felt like Travis Fryman was an underrated third baseman during his era.
Mhm.
Okay. I remember Travis Fryman was at bat, and the story was I forgot who Sparky Anderson was talking to in the dugout. And the Tigers had one guy on base. And Sparky Anderson asked the person, "Okay, how many RBIs does Fryman have?" He has. He's like, they were like, "Oh, he has 72." Okay, he'll have 74 when he comes to sit down. Sure enough, that at bat, Travis Fryman hit a two-run homer. Like baseball guys, they know their guys.
Yep.
And they know the ins and outs. It's kind of like in going back to Major League. When they had that one game playoff with the Yankees,
Hmm.
and Lou Brown took out Al Harris and brought in Vaughn, even though that Vaughn had struggled against Clue Haywood, and even Taylor looked
Right.
at him and he was like,
Right.
"I got a hunch."
Right.
he, he
Analytics is going to tell you keep Vaughn in the play in the pin.
right. But you know what? Some like again, managers know their guys, and you know when a guy is right. You know when a guy has that feel to him. You know when it's his moment. And
Hmm.
and again, that comes back to like that just comes back to your gut. That just comes back, to instincts. It's kind of like, switching gears to the NBA. When Shaquille O'Neal was in his prime, you know what? Just get the big fella in the post and let him do what he does. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? It was like, listen, when Kobe started off a game by knocking down his first couple of shots, it was basically like, you know what? We got to do everything possible to make sure Kobe keeps getting the basketball. And if you're the
Right.
opponent, we got to do everything possible to try to slow this guy down. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? But it's your gut, it's your instinct.
Yeah, managing is definitely a part of numbers. Like numbers
Hmm.
is definitely a part of it, but it's more instinct and gut than anything. And I look back as my time as a district manager in my line of work. And hey, guess what? I know this week your head's messed up. I'm not going to send you in on this case. I'm not going to send you in this account because guess what? Your head's messed up. You're not right. You're not going to close the deal. Maybe next week you might be more equipped to close the deal. Or it's this type of business. This is what they do.
Hmm.
You're a blue collar guy. I'm not sending you in this law firm to close the deal.
Right.
I'm going to send you into a plumbing company, a
Correct.
construction company to close the
Correct.
deal. You got to know your personnel.
Right.
You got to go with your gut. And guess what? You're going to make the right decisions more times than not if you're actually in tuned and focused in on what's going on around you.
Yeah. Listen, it's one of those things, you hire people. If you hire people, you hire them to do a job. And if you're going to hire somebody to manage, if you're going to hire somebody to lead, that means you shouldn't micromanage, because if you have to micromanage
Exactly.
if you have to question a person's decision making, then you should not have hired them in the first place.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That I've always been a big believer in that. And like you see it, in sports, especially in baseball, more often than not. And it's kind of like even the managers, some of the managers are kind of like catchers. It's kind of like, they're like a deer in the headlights, because they like, okay, if I make this move, am I going to hear about it? If I keep this guy in as a starting pitcher for too long, am I going to have to deal with it from the GM? All of these things. Whereas it's
Hmm.
like it has to be, instinctual. It's like I look at a guy like Bobby Valentine. Bobby Valentine was quirky as a manager, but Bobby Valentine, maybe not with the Red Sox, but like when he was with Texas and when he was with the Mets,
Great instincts.
great instincts. Okay, phenomenal instincts. A guy like Davy Johnson. Um,
Great
Davey,
instincts.
yeah, you figure Davey
Buck
was a
Showalter.
Davey was a player. Okay, won a World Series with Baltimore, managed Baltimore. I think every single team that Davey Johnson managed, he got him to the playoffs. The Nationals, the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers might have been the only team that he managed that he didn't get to the playoffs. But he got the Orioles, the Reds, and the Mets to the playoffs. Okay, and
Mhm.
of course he won a World Series with the Mets. You mentioned Buck. Buck knew how to get the most out of his guys, and it started off great with the Mets. And the reason why it didn't, it fizzled out with the Mets, it wasn't anything that Buck Showalter didn't do. But if you're bringing in analytical people to run the front office and you have an
Mhm.
old school manager like Buck
Oh,
Show, exactly, exactly, it's not
and
going to
that's what
work.
happened there. He did
We,
not get along with that front office.
right, right. And again, that goes back to the owner because if you're bringing this guy in to do a job, let him do it.
You got to, and that's another thing too. You got to mesh up your personnel,
Mm.
even in the front office and,
Yeah.
and the manager coach. If you've got a offensive minded GM and a
Hmm.
defensive minded manager or head coach,
It ain't
it's
gonna
not going
work.
to work.
It ain't gonna work.
Got
It
to get
ain't.
these guys on the same page.
It ain't gonna work. But
And
yeah, but yeah, man. Listen, we covered a lot. Um, Hopefully, people can understand where, some of the old school cats are coming, on this matter because it's real. And I feel like, and I think Mark, you're on the same lines. At some point, something has got to give.
yeah, absolutely, man. Something's got to give. We've got to start from, to recap kind of younger ages, stop letting these pitchers throw stuff that they shouldn't do to damage their arms.
Hmm.
Stop encouraging them to throw super hard because
Hmm.
that's going to have a long-standing effect on
Right.
their career and their lifestyle.
Right.
And then when you do get to the major league level, we've got to stop coddling these guys and we've got to let them get into trouble. We've
Right.
got to let them get into trouble a little bit so they can figure their way out of trouble. That used to
Bingo.
be my favorite thing is watching a pitcher work out of a sticky situation.
Yeah.
That's so rare now to where you got two guys on and you're in the middle, fourth, fifth, sixth inning. 9 times out of 10, that pitcher's out of there. He's
Yeah.
not figuring out a way to navigate out of that situation. That used to really be the gumption
Yeah.
that was on display of that individual.
And you know why? Because there was a time when guys realized, you know what? My fastball is not on tonight. Let me work with my slider. Let me work with my circle change. Let me work, my curve. Let me work with my split, something like that. More often than not, nowadays, guys, if their fastball ain't working, there's no plan B at all.
Yep. Yep.
And
Plan
and it,
B is get him out of there.
yeah, and it's kind of like, using a movie analogy, it's kind of like when Rocky cut Drago,
Yeah.
in Rocky 4. And it was kind of like, Drago at that point felt like he was invincible.
Mhm.
He didn't have a plan B at that point. And it was like, oh no, I've been cut. What do I do? This guy came to fight. And I'm like, yo, dude, at some point, to your point, it's like there's not a lot of guys out there that take the bump that, put that fear in opposing lineups. It was like,
Mhm.
with a guy like Clemens, for an example, you knew that there was a possibility Clemens was going to strike out 15 that night. Jack Morris was another one. Jack
Oh
Morris,
yeah.
would deal,
Hmm.
on the mound. Kevin Brown, I remember Kevin Brown had that run, with, Florida and San Diego where he was practically unhittable,
Yep.
and then like again, Kevin Brown was another guy, big, pitcher.
Hmm.
We don't have that anymore. We
No,
just don't. We just don't.
not at all, man. A lot of athletes are trying to be pitchers instead of pitchers
Correct.
being pitchers.
Listen, it's an art form, man, and it's like that's something that analytics cannot account for. It's just like in the NBA, everybody is not meant to be a three-point shooter.
No.
Every quarterback is not meant, to have a John Elway type arm and just launch the football 65, 70 yards down the field. That's what made John Elway special.
Exactly.
you know.
Everybody's got their own talents and abilities.
hmm Yeah. But yeah, folks, we hope that you enjoyed what you heard on this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. Definitely appreciate you if you had the opportunity to check this out. As always, if you like what you heard and saw, hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. It is always greatly appreciated. Mark, anything that you want to say to the folks in closing?
No, just hope you enjoyed everything. Leave us some comments, and that's about it, man.
Listen, Listen, you know what to do, folks. You can check me out on the X at 300 Pounds of Sports. Of course, the X is formerly known as Twitter. Give me that follow. I'll give you that follow right back. Same thing goes for Instagram at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. So, for the one and only Mark Jenkins, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.